Chris Eboch is the author of more than 100 books for young people and over 25 novels for adults written as Chris Bach. She has presented writing workshops around the world. Check out her Substack newsletter for writers at I have a menu on the way.
Don't worry about reading that.
It's on the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chris Eboch is great and super talented and wonderful, and she's going to blow us all away with knowledge about how to improve our pitch. And without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Chris.
Yes, I have written many novels for young people. I was the regional advisor for the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators for 10 years, during which time I put on 10 conferences and attended probably 50. This is just a little bit of the background of like why I am going to tell you how to improve your pitch, even though I'm not actually an editor or an agent. I also write with mystery and romance as Chris Bach. I was just at the Romance Writers of America conference last week in Niagara Falls, Ontario, and I went to a pitch session with an agent where he had people hand in anonymous query letters, basically, read them aloud, gave live feedback, and so I'm also incorporating some of his comments or his advice on how to do things. To start, let's just kind of say briefly what we're talking about here. A pitch can mean different things in different industries or even different parts of writing, but it's basically part of a query letter, which goes along with the author bio and maybe a personalized note to that editor or agent. It can also be something that you use in a live pitching event. So at this conference last week, you could sign up for 7-minute sessions with an agent or editor and pitch your novel to them, verbally. So you do that a little bit differently. Or sometimes online, you can have a workshop, or Twitter used to have a lot of pitch fests. Now I don't know how much is happening on X. A lot of the writer community has moved to Blue Sky. And so sometimes there are options there where you just post your 280 character one-line pitch. So a pitch can mean a one-line thing. It can also mean a longer thing that you would put in a query letter. Query letters are generally supposed to be 350 words, maybe 400 is about the maximum I've seen, and that includes any biographical information and your personalization for why you're addressing this to this particular agent. So that gives you up to 250 words for describing your story. And it's often in a paragraph or two, maybe 3. It should summarize the story in a catchy and succinct manner, the entire story. Not every detail of it, but not just the premise. It should convey some of the plot, potentially even the ending. It has to be clear with specific details. And this is where a lot of pitches fall down, because it's so hard to cram a complete novel into 250 words that it's tempting to kind of use vague statements like they must choose between love and duty, or they must find their destiny. But the thing is, I did a pitch session in Colorado for the Children's Book Writers Group there last fall, and I read through 40 pitches. And you see those same kind of vague, almost cliched summaries so often that they mean nothing. They tell the agent nothing about what actually happens in your story. So you need to be specific. You should not try to manipulate or avoid spoilers by saying things like, if you want to find out what happens, you have to read the whole manuscript. Some agents and editors will say they want to know the ending because they want to know that you can tell a complete story. If you're saying that it has shocking twists, like, you need to give them the twist so that they can tell whether or not they're truly shocking. So it is not the same as the description you would have on the back of the book or on like the Amazon page telling you whether you want, here's what the book is. So it helps the reader decide whether they want to buy it. Because for the reader, you're going to focus on the premise and maybe a few catchy details. So there are similarities, but don't just try to copy a book description. That might give you ideas of how to start a pitch, but you need to go deeper. So I'm going to start by going over the pitches that were sent in advance. I am going to tear them apart. I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm not trying to hurt feelings. I'm definitely not saying that you wrote a terrible pitch and that means you're a terrible writer or you're a terrible person. This is really hard. And in the Colorado conference, I reviewed like 42 pitches, and of those, basically one was more or less ready to go. Every other one had a lot of weaknesses because this is so hard and it takes time to figure out how to do it in general and specifically for your own work. So if your pitch is one of the ones that's read, be gentle with yourself, and please accept that I'm trying to give you helpful information to improve. And the way to do that, I think, is to be as direct and honest and clear as possible. Agents and editors are incredibly busy. They may get hundreds of queries per week. If they spend, say, 5 minutes carefully considering each of those queries, that 100 queries a week is going to add up to more than an 8-hour day. They don't have that kind of time. They're going through these on the subway, on the way home, after a long day. They're looking for reasons to say no. I mean, yes, they want to find great stories to represent, but an agent can maybe handle 30 or 40 clients. So they're not going to be taking on even one new client a week. That means if they're getting 100 queries a week, actually one new client a month. So if they're getting 100 queries a week, they're looking for reasons to just not even have to look at the synopsis or first chapter of most of those. So you want to clearly show what it is that you have that matches something that they are looking for. So of the queries that were sent in, one of them was not a pitch, so I'm not going to share it. It was more of like a snippet from a novel, maybe. So I'm not sure if that author didn't understand what a pitch was, which is fine. We all have to start somewhere and learn. Or if they were trying to hook with atmosphere. If you are self-publishing and you're putting together your book description page, you might have a quote or a snippet from the story to show readers what they're getting into. I would not do that in a query letter because the agent or the editor want to know what are you sending them? What is this thing? And if they're just looking at the preview pane, not even opening the whole email, as this agent last week said, then they need to know right away, what is this thing? And you don't have a lot of room to capture their attention. So focus on telling the story. If you can share some of your voice in that, great. If you can share, if your story is humorous, maybe your pitch can be a little humorous. If your story is very poetic, lyrical, you want to incorporate that into the way that you tell the story, but you want to get those clear, specific details in. So moving on. Arcana Book 1, I Am the Grave. Caleb, Harley, Bo, and Z all have dreams of escaping their hometown in Portland, Oregon to rise in fame on the alt-rock scene. This is a good first sentence because we've got characters, we know what their goal is, we have both the setting city and also the alt-rock setting. So good start. As they meet and form a band, they soon discover that they have more in common than mere musical aspirations. Not a lot happening in that sentence. Like, we already know they have musical aspirations, so just don't tell us that they have more in common. Just tell us what it is. One by one, they awaken to their magical abilities. Okay, that's an interesting addition. That first sentence, I was getting the feeling of a realistic contemporary story. So if there's magic in it, this author might want to put up front title, word count, genre, instead of putting it lower down so that the agent isn't thinking one thing and then startled by magical abilities. From a source known as the tarot. That's a little confusing because I'm not sure what a source is. With the help of their zany band manager, that suggests a bit of comedy because he's zany. So maybe that character doesn't really belong in this unless you really want to convey that there is humor in it. You don't need to include all major characters. In this case, because there's four who are all have the same goal, I don't mind having those four names, but often you're recommended to just focus on main character, their main plot, cut out the subplots, don't even name secondary characters. So they come to realize their mission, uniting the Terra once and for all and restoring balance in the world. What does that mean? How do they unite the Terra? We don't know what the Terra is yet. What does restoring balance in the world mean? No big deal, right? Touch of humor there. Blending the worlds of dark fiction and fantasy. Well, there's a thing called dark fantasy. It's actually having a moment right now. So just say this is a dark fantasy. In the vein of Ordinary Monsters and the Night Circus, I looked it up. Ordinary Monsters was from 2022, so that's not too bad. But the Night Circus is 2011, so that's pretty old for a comparison title. Try to stick with something that is in the last 5 years maximum. You can also use TV or movies, though, if you want to show kind of that it's this kind of thing. I Am the Grave follows the lives of four troubled young men residing in Portland, Oregon. We already knew that. That can be cut. In the early 2000s. The agent last week, one of the pitches he read was set in the 1980s, and he said, nope, make it today. And people said, but there may be reasons. I was like, nope, make it today. I don't care. You know, if it was a story about pen pals, they can send email. There was a financial crisis. We have those today. So I think what he was saying is it's harder to sell something that is historical, but not very historical. It doesn't have the same appeal as something that is truly historical fiction. So there's a question of like, why does this have to be set in the early 2000s? Maybe there's a good reason. I would just cut that reference and let if the agent requests it, let him discover through the story why it's important. Otherwise, you have to probably explain in the query why it needs to be historical. So if it was something like, Janie grew up in a small town in the 1950s, and her conservative upbringing did not prepare her for going to San Francisco in 1968 with the sex, drugs, and rock and roll scene. That would work because you're talking about, you have a character, you have a setting, time and places, and you have some conflict right there in that setting. Otherwise, though, be cautious about setting things in the recent past. First of all, make sure you have a very good reason for it when you're writing the novel, but in the query, you might just want to leave that out. Okay, as they tour together with growing fame, a formidable enemy, how is it formidable? Traces their every move. Like, what does that actually mean? Determined to derail their mission, how? As they work to locate the magical artifacts. What magical artifacts? That's the first we've heard that there are magical artifacts, and we don't know why they're trying to locate them. And understand the true depths of their powers. It's one of those phrases that sounds good but doesn't actually mean anything. And so agents are going to, it could apply to literally hundreds of novels. So what does it mean in this context? So this is actually pretty good. If tightened, it's 163 words. So a query should be 250 to 350. So this already leaves some room for the personalization and bio, but tightening it would mean that the author could add more specific details about the plot. The title suggests fantasy. The first sentence suggests realistic. So again, I would just move that title, word count, genre up front to make it clear. Then there's humor, but it's a dark fantasy. So that's a little bit confusing. If the book isn't humorous, probably delete the humor from the query. Maybe delete it anyway because it just feels like there's a lot going on. So here's my revised version. I Am the Grave is a, whatever the word count is, dark fantasy. Include those recent comps and then say why. So this is not something I'd heard before, but the agent last week said, don't just give the comps, give why you are choosing those comps, because his logic was that the comps that you're giving now, like that trend may be already on the way out. Those, even a book that was published this year sold several years ago. but the why could be more enduring. It also is something that gives more of an explanation. Like if you say, not for this story, but like the zany comedy of this book plus the sensitive exploration of mental health of this other book, that gives comp titles, but it also explains why those are like yours, as opposed to like this is just sort of in that general category. If these are both dark fantasy novels, then you don't really need to give examples of dark fantasy novels. So start with the title, word count, genre. If you're going to give the comps, make sure they're recent ones and explain why. Then Caleb, Harley, Bo, and Z all have dreams of escaping their hometown in Portland, Oregon to rise in fame on the alt rock scene. Cut the next sentence. They awaken to their magical abilities and realize their mission. I would cut all that other stuff. Uniting the, I don't know that you need to name the tarot, but just what is it? So tell me what it is that they have to unite. And something more specific than restoring balance to the world. Like, what does that mean? Are they keeping demons from taking over the world? Are they going to turn the world into a utopia? Are they just keeping things the way they are? Then I moved that part up. I cut the second reference to Portland, Oregon and the time. As they tour and search for their magical artifacts, that will do what? What are those artifacts going to do? Instead of a formidable an enemy, like what is the enemy actually threatening them with? What is he doing to them? Why is he tracing their every move? If they're on tour, wouldn't it be pretty clear where they're supposed to be? So I'm not sure why it's significant that the enemy has to trace their move. Determined to derail their mission. How? So what does the enemy actually do, and what did they actually do in response? And how does that build to some kind of climax? So good start. Just need to get rid of the repetitiveness and the phrases that don't mean very much and really nail those specific details. The title here does fit with paranormal and possibly horror or dark fantasy, so that all kind of fits together well. With my trimming, it's now 113 words. I cut 50 words, so that gives time to fill in those later plot details. Next up is Grizzly Streets. A grizzly expert with PTSD from a bear mauling. Okay, I love that. That is a character with internal conflict and probably external conflict as well, because if their job is working with bears and they are now afraid of bears, there's immediately a challenge there. A precocious 10-year-old, okay, that's kind of fun, visiting her free spirit mother and an altruistic campaign manager. Those are a little more generic. Again, you might cut, you don't need to have every major character in there. You might focus just on the grizzly expert and why that person is involved. Maybe the precocious 10-year-old, but you don't need everybody. Campaign manager is too vague, like what kind of campaign? Political. They connect during an explosive signature collecting effort. Signature collecting does not sound explosive. So I'm not sure why. I mean, is it literally, does their bomb go off? Because that would be dramatic, but that's probably not the case. So either be specific or you don't necessarily need to say how they connect, especially if you're just focusing on the grizzly expert. They must save wilderness areas from developers' bulldozers. Good. I mean, I am behind that goal, but why must they save it? Or why are these people personally invested? Like, what is the stakes for them or for the one or two that you are going to follow? By reestablishing endangered grizzlies in Colorado. I'm not exactly sure what that means. Like, they are going to be releasing bears into the wilderness in order to stop, more detail would just make that clearer. In Grizzly Streets, you don't really need to repeat the name there. Just at some point say Streets is an word count genre. Tension builds in the streets of Denver and the San Juan wilderness. Okay, a couple of good locations there. As opposition from farmers, ranchers, and locals threaten more than a loss to the Great Bears. That last bit, a loss to the Great Bears, it's a little awkward because it almost, with the Great Bears capitalized, it sounds like a sports team. And they're a loss to the Bears. I think you mean a loss for the Bears. But really, we're focused on like our grizzly expert with PTSD. Like, what is the goal and the motivation for that character? I can't even tell the gender here. So focusing on that one character would give a clearer somebody who has a specific goal and high stakes, and maybe you room to say, like, do they have to work with bears even though they're now scared? Is there going to be an issue with the bears? The opposition for farmers, ranchers, and locals, that's also kind of vague. Like, what do they actually do? Are they just opposed? Are they speaking up in City Hall? Or is it like, if you could have a few moments, like, but as they try to take the bears to the place they need to go, they have to go on a public access land through a ranch land, but the rancher has put up a locked gate and greets them with a shotgun. Like, then we know something specific that happens that sounds dramatic, and that sort of shows that this is an action-packed novel. So always try to be more specific. I would recommend cutting down to one or maybe two characters, focusing on a single thread. The grizzly expert with PTSD from the bear mauling is the most compelling. So what are the stakes for that person, and why do they have to do this specific thing right now? And then get rid of those vague things like tension builds and threaten, and be specific. You don't necessarily have to include like how it works out in the end. I'm hoping that they succeed, but you could mention the final conflict, like it builds to a head and X happens. There's a showdown wherever, the bears get loose, whatever actually sort of happens towards the end, the climax, to show the agent that you have a novel that builds to a dramatic climax. And then name the genre. It feels like suspense or thriller. The title suggests thriller or maybe gritty mystery or suspense. So all of that is kind of working together, but go ahead and name it specifically. And I realized that for this particular exercise, you didn't necessarily put the entire pitch in, and you may have been trying to keep it short. So I understand that there may have been things that were cut for that reason. Next is Where I Does Not Exist. As for the rest, Louisa knows what to do. A man assures his wife before he's visited. That's kind of awkward because we've got three characters, Louisa, a man, and his wife. And we don't know what the rest is or what to do about what. So kind of starting out vague there. Before he's visited by La Comadre Sebastiana, the angel of death in New Mexico folklore. Interesting. That's kind of an intriguing detail. You could probably cut the name and just say he's visited by the angel of death from New Mexican folklore, just to not throw too many specific details at the agent right away. Louisa, their oldest daughter, isn't sure what she knows. So is Louisa really the main character here? If so, I would start with her and I would focus on how she experiences the story. But a journey that has taken her from naive schoolgirl. Wait a minute. So does this start when she's a child? Is this going to be like a decades-long story? Through prophetic dreams and multiple heartbreaks, has prepared her in ways she doesn't realize. Prepared her for what? So again, a lot of sort of vagueness here that comes from trying to summarize a full-length novel in a few sentences. So I like the intrigue of the New Mexico folklore. It's overall too vague. I'm not sure if this is Louisa's story or the family's story. I'm not sure if it starts when she's a schoolgirl or an adult. I'm not sure when her father dies, like how old she is, what actually happens. What does she have to do in this story? What are the stakes? Like she's doing something, but is she fighting supernatural creatures? Or is it something else entirely? It's hard to say. It's hard to tell if this is magical realism, suspense, horror, maybe historical fiction. So you should go ahead and name the genre in your query, but it should also be clear from the pitch itself. It should feel like what it is. So multiple heartbreaks. Like if this is a romance and she will actually, her love story with a final, the one she winds up with, it doesn't feel like a romance. If it's supernatural, it kind of feels like that, but I don't know if the prophetic dreams are real or how the multiple heartbreaks prepare her for whatever it is that she's going through. The title I don't love. It's a quote by Pablo Neruda about love. So the first question is, will the editor, agent, and reader recognize that quote? And if they do, will they think that this is a love story? And is it? Because it does not sound like it to me just reading the pitch. And if they don't recognize it, will that title attract them? Or will they think, well, like that sounds awkward, or is this going to be a book that's full of a lot of dialect that's hard to read through? So that's just my opinion there. Titles often change before publication anyway, but a title is an opportunity to hook the agent and hint at the story genre. So just for fun, I decided to try rewriting this one. Now, I don't know what the story is. All I have is the information on the slide right now. So this is my example of what a story that could contain these elements and is definitely, I'm sure, not the actual story. So 27-year-old Luisa Sanchez, so we know a little bit more about her right there, has rejected her family's old-fashioned beliefs in New Mexican folklore for a career in high finance. We have a character, we know sort of what she wants, and a little bit of family conflict. Then she witnesses the angel of death come for her father. His dying words are, as for the demons, because that's much more specific and catchy than as for the rest, Louisa knows what to do. But if she once had that knowledge, she's long since forgotten it. Are the vivid nightly dreams she dismissed actually prophecies? Trying to interpret their clues, she seeks help from three men in turn, but each fails or betrays her. Only when she embraces her family's history and ancient beliefs does she understand. She must journey to the underworld, find the lost obsidian blade of her ancestors, and fight the god of death, or the world will descend into chaos, killing everyone she loves. Now, like I said, that is not whatever this author wrote. I am 100% certain. It is just an example of how you could include specific details that go up to and include her final conflict. And I could not tell from what I had whether it was anything like this or it's really just a historical romance with romantic magical realism elements or anything else. So you have to be specific because otherwise the agent might say, oh, that doesn't sound like the kind of thing I represent when it is, or, oh, that sounds really interesting because they're making assumptions that are untrue, or most likely they're just going to say, I don't know what this is. Delete, reject because I just don't have enough information. And they want to know upfront, is this going to be marketable? They can't tell if it's marketable if they don't know what it is. They also want to know, are you going to be worth the investment? So they don't get paid until you get paid. I'm assuming that you're targeting agents here just because if you're going for traditional publishing, that is usually where you would start, and then they would represent it to a publisher. And an agent gets paid 15% of whatever you make, which means they don't get paid until they've worked with you to make sure the manuscript is in great shape. That means possibly they read it multiple times. Then they have to send out to editors. Hopefully they get a deal. They have to negotiate the contract. And so if it feels like you are going to be high maintenance because you don't know the business well enough, you can't convey your ideas clearly enough, or whatever else, it's easier to skip it Whereas if you say, like, this is what a query letter is, and I've nailed all the pieces and I've been very clear, that just makes you look good. And we know how very, very hard it is to do that. Agents are not necessarily themselves writers, so they have not necessarily had to turn their novel into a query letter. All right, our last one is Knitting Saves a Village. A teen girl tries to save an 1800s reenactment village to pad her resume, only to fall in love with the place and the axe-wielding Viking who works there. I'm assuming this is more of something that you would use in like a Twitter pitch where you just really had that short word count. And this is fun. This has a lot of great elements in it. A teen girl, so we know right there that's probably a young adult novel. You could name her and give her age or something. Um, the setting is intriguing, a reenactment. Now, I did initially, when they said an 1800s reenactment village, I'm kind of thinking maybe like colonial, or not even colonial, but later in like American, maybe 1800s, and then a Viking is a little different there. So I'm not really sure how the Viking in the 1800s, because Viking sounds more like a medieval reenactment village. Um, it's not clear where this is, if it's, United States or Scandinavia or, you know, someplace else. She has a goal and there's a twist. She wants to pad her resume, but padding her resume doesn't really feel like a high stakes goal. So this as is would probably work if you really were trying to do a one sentence succinct pitch. But if you have the room, you want to go into wants to pad her resume. Why? Because she's trying to get into her dream college and she needs something special to stand out, or because she's trying to get this very competitive internship in hospitality, and that sort of why she thinks saving this place would help. It's also not clear why this village needs to be saved. So that's something to work into a longer pitch. So, what are the initial stakes? Like, why does she need the padded resume? Why is the village at risk? And then what are the ultimate stakes? Like, because why can't she have everything she wants? Why can't she save the village, which will pad her resume, and also fall in love with the Viking? So, it feels like that might be a little bit low conflict here. Now, romance can have a low conflict, and this kind of feels like, I'm assuming it's a romance, but still there should be a reason they can't be together. So you'd want to expand upon that in a longer pitch. She's been dreaming of going away to this other place. That's why she needs her incredible resume, and he's not going to be leaving or something like that. So it could be something like, 17-year-old Kathy needs something impressive on her resume in order to get into her dream college in London. She's worked summers at the medieval reenactment village near her home in Texas, but it's on the brink of bankruptcy. If she can lure in more tourists and save it, then she'll, you can kind of go on from there, just adding those specific details about where this is, who the character is, why she wants to pad her resume, what are the stakes, and so forth. So to go over some things for a more general, if you were trying to work on your own query, you want title, genre, and word count. Opinion varies on where to put that. Some like it right up front. Some like to start with a real key sentence to grab the reader's attention, and then after the the plot description, have the title, genre, and word count. I would default to first unless you have a good reason otherwise, because as we've seen, sometimes it takes a little while to get all the elements of a story, and just saying right up front that this is historical or this is a paranormal, it sets expectations. Also, if you do have an agent who is just quickly going through emails, only looking at the preview pane or skimming to see, is this even something I represent? Because I guarantee they get lots of queries that are things they do not represent. So you put that right up front. If you've done your homework and you know that they represent this thing, you've told them right up front that, yes, this is the kind of thing that you represent. You want a specific character, usually with a name. Maybe two, seldom more, unless they're a group. A specific crisis. So the novel's main problem, not just sort of where the character starts out, but you want to make it clear like what is the main problem that they are trying to solve over the course of the novel. And you want to show that the main character, it's high stakes for the main character. And that doesn't mean just saving the world. It means why this character has to solve the problem themselves right now. Why is it important for them? Avoid cliches and those vague statements. Things like choosing between loyalty and or family loyalty and our own dreams, or he must follow his destiny, or he must learn from the past to change the future. That kind of thing could potentially work on a sales page or book description for a reader. But when agents are seeing that same kind of thing over and over and over, it tells them nothing and it doesn't feel fresh. Include the ending conflict or challenge, even if you don't say how it wraps up. And it is okay to have spoilers. Do not avoid spoilers because agents and editors, like they want to know that you know how to shape a story before they start reading. They don't want to start reading and then find out that you just didn't even know how to end the novel and fell apart at the end. So they will tell you that they are perfectly capable of reading and judging and enjoying a story, even if they know the ending. It is great to put in subgenres and tropes if you are writing in genre fiction. So for romance, the subgenres would be like contemporary, romantic comedy, romantic suspense, maybe the popular hero type if you have a cowboy, doctor, Navy SEAL, or personality, alpha or grumpy. Those can be very popular with readers, so go ahead and say in there that that's what it is. And then if you have a trope like it's a second chance romance, or there's a secret baby, or an arranged marriage, or fake dating, romance readers, many of them love these tropes. And if you tell them that you have a grumpy cowboy who is fake dating, they want that book. So go ahead and let the agent know, because that will let them know, like, I can market this and I know the publisher who will want it. For mystery, your subgenres be like police procedural, amateur detective, cozy, noir. With horror, that has a lot of breadth. Is it psychological, supernatural, slasher, monster, zombie, body horror? So some of the fantasy subgenres are contemporary, dark, high fantasy, epic, steampunk, sword and sorcery. These are great shortcuts for you because if you say it's a high fantasy, then the agent or editor will immediately have an idea of what that means. And that way you don't have to go into as much detail about the world building. Science fiction, it could be cyberpunk, space opera, hard science fiction, dystopian. So think about what subgenres you have. And you can I just Googled like romance subgenres and then mystery subgenres to get some of these lists. So if you're not sure, try to nail it down that way. Pixar has the system that supposedly they use to figure out the heart of a story. And you can use this to help condense your novel into a pitch. So once upon a time, there was. Now you're not actually going to use the phrase. It's just kind of this is your very rough draft to get you thinking about what was there, who is there, and when and where are they. Every day, a little bit about the main character's ordinary world. Another way you can do that is saying that main character's name is a descriptive adjective in job, so that we know a little bit of like their an overachieving businessman or whatever it is, but something that gives us a hint of how things start. But one day, something changes, it upsets the routine. That is the inciting incident that gives the main character a new goal and forces them to act. Because of that, so we get consequences. Because of that, more. So it's showing like this is sort of one thing leads to another, takes us through until finally, and that is the climax. And if you want more detail on this, just look up Pixar Heart of the Story, and you will, or Pixar story structure, and you'll find several. I'm sure you can find multiple articles on this. It goes into a little bit more detail. Nathan Bransford is a former agent and also an author who came up with query letter Mad Libs. So this is a kind of a fun way, and it also sort of breaks down in a relatively simple. So, dear agent name, I chose to submit to you because of your wonderful taste in whatever genre and because personalized tidbit. And then this is the Mad Libs pitch part. Protagonist's name is a description of protagonist living in setting. But when complicating incident, then protagonist's name must protagonist quest and verb the villain in order to protagonist goal or else what's at stake. So it's funny when you put it like that, but really that hits all of those important points. And then maybe not going to work simply for every story because sometimes you don't have a villain per se, but you can adapt this to different things. And then title is a word count work of genre, credits, thank you, and so forth. So again, if you look up query letter Mad Libs, you'll probably find this. Certainly, if you add Nathan Bransford's name, you will find this on his it's still available on his blog page. And then for fun, I thought we would share a query letter that I wrote that got me to it. I sent it out to about 50 agents and it got me 2 offers of representation. Well, not just the query letter, but without the query letter, they wouldn't have asked for the manuscript. So, dear agent name, and this is just kind of my template, so I could adapt this with if I had a personal connection. So, Something Shady at Sunshine Haven is an 83,000 word cozy mystery, the first in a planned series featuring a former war correspondent turned private detective who finds facing 50 almost as challenging as the mysteries she solves. I mentioned a planned series because cozy mysteries, the publishers are going to be looking for a series. Otherwise, if you're not in a genre that typically has series, you wouldn't necessarily want to say this, I want this to be a series, because some publishers will just want to try the first book and see how it does before they commit to a longer series with an unknown author. So that's kind of the series pitch. Then, when patients are mysteriously dying at an Alzheimer's unit, war correspondent Kate Tessler must use her investigative skills to uncover the killer and save her mother. So that's kind of the book, the individual book's pitch. And this feels like seeing both of these together, it seems a bit repetitive. So I'm not sure if I was just tweaking and using one or the other, or if I was repetitive. And that is possible. I wanted to share this to show that you do not have to be perfect. As much as I kind of tore apart those other pitches, yeah, you can get away with some weaknesses as long as you do the main things you need to do. So, injured in a bombing, Kate returns to her hometown in Arizona with new scars, a limp, and pain meds that give her brain fog. For the first time in her life, she's starting to feel her age, 49, even though she's living like a teenager again. Staying with her father, trying to understand why her sister resents her so much, and running into old friends who still think of her as Kitty. This is a lot of character setup, especially if I included the previous page. So it probably could be tightened, but it gives a sense of who this person is and why she's already struggling. Seeing her mother in an Alzheimer's unit is the hardest part until an old friend asks her to investigate suspicious deaths at that nursing home. So now we starting to have a conflict of this mystery. The next, I kind of just did 3 possibilities that she investigates. Is a self-appointed angel of mercy killing patients to end their suffering? Are family members hastening their inheritance? Is an employee extorting money and killing the witnesses? Another way to do it would be maybe to pick a couple of active things throughout the novel, like when she does this, she's almost run down by a speeding car as she crosses the street. A few of those to show that there's action. I felt that since it is a mystery novel and there's a lot of investigating these different threads, this was just a way of showing that I have plot. There are suspects. There are things for her to do throughout the middle of the story. Kate uses her journalism skills to track clues, but the puzzle pieces simply won't fit. If Kate can't uncover the truth, her mother could be next on the killer's list. Those are the stakes, and they're very high stakes for her. Not only her potential mother's death, but a time frame thing. Like she has to find the killer before he kills again and possibly kills her mother. Kate has followed the most dangerous news stories around the world, but can she survive going home? Probably not necessary in a query letter. It is kind of a nice, hooky sounding statement. I've used that on social media and so forth. So those are some of the elements. I'm not sure I used all of them in every letter, but then I went into the bio part. If you don't have a lot to say, that's okay. I guarantee I did not get an agent because I was already published. As I said, I submitted to 50 agents, and maybe a half a dozen of them even requested the manuscript, and 2 of them wanted to represent it. So they really are looking for the manuscript, not just somebody who has experience. And then most queries today are email. And they usually want things just pasted into the body of email, not attached. So the first chapter is pasted below, or whatever it is they asked for. You have to go to their guidelines and find out what exactly they want and give them that. Sign off. I wouldn't say things like, I look forward to hearing from you very soon, because that feels a bit pushy. Just thank them for their time, sign it, and then it's like a business letter, but because it's email, you put all that contact information at the end instead of up at the top. For personalization, you want to be specific and unique. Ideally, you have a reason you're sending to this particular agent, and it's not, I would just look for any agent that represented this genre. If it is, you represent mystery and I have a mystery, that's not really a good thing to say in a query letter. Don't even bother, just jump right into the pitch. But if it's something like, we met at the Left Coast Crime Conference last summer, or I attended your online workshop through SouthWest Writers last autumn, then that's a good personal connection. Or an author that they represent and I are in a critique group, and she thought you might like to see my 80,000 word historical drama. So there it's a personal recommendation, and then jumping right into word count, what it is. If you haven't met the agent, you don't have any of that personal reference, you can stalk them on social media. You should. They will say that. You should. And find something specific, though. Again, it's not just, I went to your website and I saw that you represent this genre. I mean, they know they represent that genre. There's no point in telling them. But if you have something specific, like I saw on your July 15 blog post that you'd love to see a cowboy novel about sisters who inherit a ranch, so I'd like you to send you 3 ranching sisters, then it's like I am paying attention to what you want, and I have what you want. If you don't have any of that, I would just not say anything if you don't have a good personalization. Also keep in mind, it's about why they might want to represent you. So if you say something like, oh, I heard your talk and I just loved your attitude about the publishing industry. Well, that's why you would like them to be your agent. It's not why you are going to be a great client for them. So focus on what you can bring to the table. And I put in there, beware ChatGPT or any kind of AI use for research. The agent last week commented that he's been getting a lot of queries with the same exact phrasing, and he doesn't know where it's coming from. It's not from his website or anything, but I think what I've heard going around is like, you can use ChatGPT to help you research agents. You give them the synopsis, like, this is what my story is. What agents should I submit to? And then, what should I tell them? And so ChatGPT, of course, is just regurgitating the same kind of stuff. And so it may be just looking for, I'm writing a young adult horror novel, and it says, okay, these people represent young adult horror, and here's a nice sounding but bland introduction to why you're sending it to them. But you may be saying the exact same thing as anybody else who is also using ChatGPT. So I'm not saying you can't use it to narrow the field, but definitely do the work yourself to put it in your own words. Comp titles, those are the comparison titles, like my book is like other things. You can use books, you can also use movies or TV, but they should be recent ones, like a TV show that's going on now, or books or movie from the last 5 years, or even better, the last 3 years. They don't have to be just like yours. Like I have a sweet romance series set around a cat cafe. If I were looking for comp titles for that, I don't need to find a sweet romance series set around a cat cafe, but I might want to find sweet romance that has animals, or is heartwarming, or has that kind of closed community of a shop. So they can have elements of yours. And then again, like I said earlier, specify why yours is like theirs. So not just it's X meets Y, but it's the wacky hijinks and humor of X with the sensitive exploration of mental illness of Y. Not just for fans of authors X, Y, and Z, but like why it will appeal to those readers. For fans of laugh out loud rom-coms like those of authors X, Y, and Z, something like that. Because that feeling that is the readers want will last potentially longer than the trend. Usually you end your query letter with a bio. You want to stick to stuff that is relevant to writing or relevant to this book. So it's okay to have a bit of personal information, like I live in New Mexico with my spouse, 3 teenagers, 2 dogs, and 5 cats. That lets them know a little bit about you as an individual, but mostly you want to stick to things like I'm a member of SouthWest Writers and Sisters in Crime or whatever professional organization. It doesn't prove you're a good writer, but it proves at least you're paying attention to the publishing industry and you know a little bit. If you have an MFA in writing, yes. If you took one continuing education class, you don't need to mention that. If you have relevant job experience, like if a nurse is writing a hospital romance, you could absolutely say that you're a nurse. If you're a former FBI profiler writing a thriller, say that. But not things that are true of a lot of people. Like if you're writing children's books and you have children, most people have children, so that really doesn't say anything about your expertise in writing for children. So look for things that are not shared by millions of people. Showing professionalism, like that you have some professional experience is good. You don't need to list everything. You might summarize, like, my poetry has been published in literary magazines. That shows that you've been writing and maybe publishing for a while. You don't need to list, like, my poem by the name of this was in this magazine, and my poem by the name of this was in this other magazine, especially if you're writing a novel. Or, you might say that I've written nonfiction for magazines, but you don't need to name all the details unless there's something that is impressive and relevant. Like I've had 2 stories published in Highlights for Children. Highlights is a very well-known magazine. It's hard to break into. So if I were querying even for a children's novel and I didn't have other credits, I might say I have been published in Highlights for Children. If you're new, that's fine. That they look for debut authors. There's nothing wrong with that. So you don't need to state I've never been published before or anything don't downplay yourself. Just if you don't have anything to put in your bio, you don't need to say a whole lot in your bio. And focus on selling the book, not you, because it's about whether the book is marketable and whether this person knows how to sell it. Don't claim that your story has Netflix potential or that you're going to be the next Stephen King. Anything that could come off as bragging is off-putting. Also, the agent's job is to know the industry. So if it does have streaming potential, they'll know that from your very clear pitch. You don't need to point it out to them. If you're self-published, either don't say it, don't mention it. I'm not saying hide it from an agent, but have that conversation later. If they offer to represent you, you should say, okay, I have been self-published and, here's what's happened. And then you can discuss whether, well, those books didn't have good sales rates, so we're going to maybe put you out under a different name. We're going to ignore them. Or actually, I think that maybe we can find somebody who wants to republish them. But if you're going to mention it in your query letter, then you better be able to show that you have successful numbers. And it's hard to get anyone to say what successful means. But basically, if you haven't made at least $10,000 on one book, probably do not mention that you're self-published in a query letter. As for platform, if you have a huge platform, blog with that gets 1 million hits or newsletter that goes out to 10,000 active subscribers, you can mention that if it's relevant to your book. Especially true for nonfiction. Like if you're submitting a cookbook, they're going to want to know, why is anybody going to care about your cookbook? And if you say, well, I've got this very popular blog and newsletter and so forth, then that is part of your platform. That's important. For novels, it's really not important. So you don't need to mention that you're on social media or that you blog or anything else. They may look you up to see where you are, and it can be an advantage to at least have a couple of social media accounts because it means that if they sell your book and it becomes time to promote it, you're not going to be totally resistant to the idea that you should even be on social media. But really, it's not going to be what the thing that sells or doesn't sell. So that is it. I don't know if I may have used up all the time. I don't know if we have time for questions. I do the developmental editing, and I will look over query letters as well if you want me to review yours more personally.